story that we are tracking on WION at this hour, where Taiwan has accused China of violating its airspace multiple times over the course of the last few days. Now, according to Taiwan's foreign ministry, almost about 24 warplanes of the People's Liberation Army entered into the country's air defense identification zone. Taiwan has criticized these violations as a clear threat to regional peace. It has also called on the international community to condemn the Chinese aggression. Taiwan has vowed to stand tall and has said that it will not be intimidated by Beijing. China is conducting war games near an area of the South China Sea that is controlled by Taiwan. Taipei, for its part, believes that China is trying to create a new status quo in which the PLA ships and warplanes will have free passage through the region. China has refused to rule out military options when it comes to annexing Taiwan, if it comes to that. President Xi Jinping has said in the past that annexation cannot be put off indefinitely. Experts believe that these latest maneuvers are aimed at mapping out Taiwan's radars and air response systems. And these violations also come at a time when the United States has stepped up its support for Taiwan. It has staged military drills in the region and has also sent a high-level delegation to Taipei. All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what's actually playing out in Taiwan and also these tensions which seem to be escalating between Taiwan and China, we're joined in by Brian Hoy, who is the founding editor of the New Bloom magazine, and he is joining us from Taipei City. So, Brian, let me begin by asking you this. This is a violation of the Taiwanese airspace by the Chinese fighter jets. Give us a sense as to how grave these airspace violations are and what is China's intent behind flying its fighter jets or what is effectively Taiwanese airspace.
That's right. And so the aim of the Chinese military here seems to be intimidation because of the strengthening of ties between the U.S. and Taiwan. There's an upcoming plan by the Undersecretary of State, Keith Kruk, to Taiwan.
All right, this seems
stepping up military drilling. This has gone on for the 6 months, primarily because during the COVID-19 crisis,
Brian, I'll have to interrupt you there. I think there's an issue with your line. We'll try fix that line and I'll come back to you in a bit. But this, of course, was the second straight day where the Chinese Su-30 fighters and the Y-8 aircrafts were over Taiwanese airspace. I'm told that we have fixed the line. Let's try again. Brian, you were telling us that this is essentially an intimidation tactic by the Chinese on the Taiwanese people.
That's right, because there's several moves, I think, in the Chinese repertoire to do this. For example, sending warplanes to Taiwanese airspace, crossing the median line of the Taiwan Straits is one way to do so. Another way is to send ships, naval vessels, into maritime waters that are controlled by Taiwan, and then conducting military exercises such as drilling off the coast of China, whether naval or with airplanes or with physical troops. That's another way of actually just really just trying to show Taiwan that, try to signal that, we can take you whenever we want to, and that the more you make these moves to strengthen ties with other countries, then we're eventually going to threaten you, and the threat of annexation by military force is still on the table. Yeah.
So, also try and explain to us, once China decides to violate the Taiwanese airspace, how are the people within Taiwan looking at it? I mean, are they looking at the possibility of a kind of a conflict heating up with China in the next few weeks?
The interesting thing is that this happens so often that the public does not actually respond to it. China does attempt these military drills very often, and often enough that it's become a part of everyday life. It's not something that people really react strongly to. It just is something that happens in the background. And it's actually somewhat concerning because of the fact that China has stepped up military drilling so much during the COVID-19 pandemic. There are some concerns that, for example, China could use this as a pretext or as an opportunity in order to actually launch a military assault on Taiwan, because much of the world's attention is elsewhere. Intervention by other regional powers such as Japan or South Korea or what have you, and of course America, might be limited because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there will be the concerns this entire time. That being said, a recent report from the Ministry of Defense came to the conclusion that China does not actually have the capacity now to invade and occupy Taiwan. It doesn't have a lift capacity, meaning it doesn't have enough ships to bring troops over to actually occupy Taiwan.
All right, it's interesting that you say that it does not have the capacity and enough ships to actually come and occupy Taiwan. But there's also a threat of conflict because things could so easily go wrong. You say that the people of Taiwan don't necessarily respond to it because these kind of airspace violations are done very regularly by the Chinese. But according to reports that have come in, once the Chinese airplanes entered into the Taiwanese airspace, Taiwan reportedly scrambled its own aircrafts to try and intercept the Chinese planes. Now, this is a serious escalation, isn't it? And things can go so easily wrong here.
So that is actually one of the dangers then, that Taiwan is obligated to respond every time there is an incursion into Taiwanese airspace with warplanes of its own. But then what if something goes wrong? For example, for the first time, planes locked onto each other in the Taiwan Straits. There was this escalation. You do have, for example, China sending warplanes in consecutive days. For the first time this year, I believe, China sent out warplanes into Taiwanese airspace first time at night. And then there's the danger then that something goes wrong and this uses a pretext to allow for invasion. For example, there's actually concerns regarding false news and fake news as a potential the potential use for China as to use this as justification for military assault. For example, there were reports earlier this month that the Chinese military had actually shot down a Chinese plane. And this turned out to be fake news. But through this kind of claim, this turned out to be fake news, and the Ministry of Defense had to issue a press release. But if this was registered as actually the start of conflict, then China would have the pretext, the justification to actually military assault Taiwan. And so that's always the concern when it comes to this.
All right, and lastly, just before I let you go, the fact of the matter is Xi Jinping, the Chinese leader, has insisted that he would like to follow a one China policy and has repeatedly in the past said that he would like to annex Taiwan, if need be, by force, so that Taiwan becomes a part of, what is said to be the one China sovereign aspect of the state. How concerned are the people of Taiwan when you hear these repeated threats by the Chinese leader?
It's always the major political issue in Taiwan. This is something that's always in the background of just everyday politics. And so this always goes on in the background. This has always been the case. But then particularly Xi has stepped this up severely. So I think then there are increased concerns among Taiwanese that China is becoming increasingly aggressive, that regional stability is under threat. And even if this constantly happens, that one incident does not provoke mass fear, it's still something that's always an existential threat to Taiwan.
All right, we'll have to leave there. Thank you very much indeed, Brian Ho, for joining us from Taipei and getting us all those insights. It remains to be seen as to how this particular flashpoint, in fact, plays out between China and Taiwan. We'll, of course, be tracking that story. But for the time being,